Who raised you more? Your parents, your grandparents, or someone else?
My parents told me they were too tired to come to my graduation, and when those words first came out of their mouths, I honestly thought I had misheard them. Because what kind of parent looks at the moment their kid has worked toward for 4 years and shrugs it off like it's just another Tuesday? They sat across from me at the kitchen table, sipping tea like they were delivering casual news about being late to a dentist appointment, not skipping one of the most important days of my life. And the reason, the official excuse they gave me, was that they were exhausted and needed rest. But less than an hour later, my phone lit up with a social media post from my sister Madison, and there it was in full view, my parents smiling next to her, luggage stacked behind them, checking into a luxury spa resort, announcing their well-deserved weekend of self-care. I sat there staring at the screen, reading the comments rolling in, everyone gushing about how cute they looked and how lucky Madison was to have parents who spoiled her like that, and all I could think was how easy it had been for them to dismiss me entirely, as if I were some afterthought that barely even registered in their plans. Now, let me back up for a second, because this wasn't the first time something like this happened, and maybe that's why it stung in such a specific way. My whole life I've been playing second to Madison. She's younger than me, always been the golden child, always the one my parents bragged about, the one who got surprise birthday trips, the one who had our mom personally drive cupcakes to her dorm on random Wednesdays, the one who got praised for showing up to class like it was an Olympic achievement. Meanwhile, when I worked double shifts in the library to cover my books or when I got an academic scholarship that literally saved them thousands of dollars, it was treated like a background detail, maybe worth a passing good job, but never something worth telling friends or relatives about. And over the years, I swallowed it, telling myself that if I just kept my head down, worked harder, and stayed patient, eventually my turn would come. Graduation was supposed to be that turn. It was supposed to be the moment where, for once, the spotlight wasn't just handed to Madison for existing. It was my moment, my name, my degree, my years of work summed up in that walk across the stage. I had imagined them in the crowd, clapping, maybe even tearing up a little, finally looking at me with the kind of pride I had been waiting to see my whole life. But instead, I got a spa trip with cucumber water and hot stone massages, while I was left explaining to people why my family wasn't there. The worst part wasn't even their decision. It was how casual they made it sound. My mom actually said, "It's just one ceremony, honey. There will be plenty of milestones ahead," as if a graduation is some optional practice round, as if I hadn't stayed up night after night writing papers, working part-time jobs, balancing internships, and basically clawing my way to that stage without their help. My dad chimed in with, "You'll understand when you're older. We just need to take care of ourselves," like I was some unreasonable child throwing a tantrum for expecting the bare minimum of support. And Madison? She just smirked and said something about how they deserved a break and that I shouldn't take it personally. Of course she would say that, because every break they've ever taken has been wrapped around her. I remember sitting in my room afterward, staring at my cap and gown hanging on the door, and thinking about how many times I had pushed aside my own feelings just to keep the peace. I thought about the school concerts in middle school where they showed up late because Madison had soccer practice, the birthdays where she got the bigger cake, the college applications where I filled out every form alone while they drove her to cheer camp. And I realized, with a pit in my stomach, that this wasn't just about graduation. It was the culmination of years of being told without words that I simply wasn't enough for them to show up. And here's the thing, I could have cried that night. I could have begged them to reconsider, tried to guilt them into choosing me for once. But something in me hardened instead. I looked at that spa post again, the picture of the three of them wrapped in their little bubble of favoritism, and I thought, if they can so easily erase me from one of the biggest days of my life, then maybe it's time I stop begging for their approval and find a way to remind them publicly and unmistakably that I exist, that I matter, and that I am not the daughter you can keep sidelined forever. So I didn't argue, I didn't cry, I didn't even let them see me flinch. I just nodded when they repeated their excuse, pretended I was fine with it, and quietly started forming a plan. And let me tell you, by the time graduation rolled around, I wasn't planning on walking across that stage quietly. If they wanted to skip my moment, I was going to make damn sure they still saw it. Because this time, I wasn't going to let it slide. This time, they were going to feel it. The morning after the spa post, when the likes and little hearts under my sister's caption were still climbing, and the comments were full of people congratulating them on rest they had apparently earned, I sat at my desk with my laptop open and a very steady kind of anger in my chest, the kind that doesn't make you cry or yell, but makes you start organizing information. And I went through the university site and the graduation emails like a paralegal preparing a case, because if they were going to choose rest over me, then I was going to make sure rest would not protect them from being seen, and that was the first time I noticed the small line in the ceremony schedule that said the event would be broadcast with a public link, plus a note from the communications office asking for a short student address, since the original speaker had withdrawn due to a family emergency, which made me sit up straighter and think, fine, if a door has finally cracked, I am going to walk through it. I forwarded the inquiry to the professor who had always treated me like my work mattered, the one who never cared that I wasn't loud or flashy, and I asked, in the most measured tone I could manage, whether I might be considered for the short address. Not because I wanted to be a star, but because I had something simple to say to the people who lifted me and, truthfully, to the people who didn't, and within an hour she replied that she had already sent my name because she thought of me first. And she attached a note to the dean's assistant saying I had the calm voice and backbone this kind of moment demands, which, whether or not it was true, felt like a hand on my shoulder pulling me forward. While the approval wound its way through whatever small ladder it had to climb, I drafted what I would say, and I kept it lean and human and free of ornaments, because I didn't want to make a speech. I wanted to tell the truth in sentences anyone could follow. And at the center of it, I wrote one line in plain language that would only land if I looked directly into the broadcast camera, a line that wasn't cruel or vulgar, but was sharp enough to cut through the soft excuses that had been thrown at me all year, and when I read it out loud to myself, I felt that clean little click you get when a lock turns. I knew, however, that a line in a speech would not be enough by itself, because people like my parents and my sister survive on selective visibility, so I opened my contacts and pulled together a list that included extended family. Neighbors from our old block, people from their church group, my mother's book club, the colleagues my father always tried to impress, and a few family friends who love to forward anything that looks official, and I sent a bright, polite message with the live stream link, not bitter or accusatory, just cheerful and inclusive, saying I was honored to be part of the program and that anyone who couldn't make the drive could still watch from home. And I copied my parents and my sister on it with a smile in the subject line and a note that the broadcast would include the student address right after the dean, which is the kind of soft pressure that looks like courtesy on the surface, but lands like a spotlight when you're hiding. Then I took care of the seats, because they had requested 2 guest passes months ago when it was still convenient to act like they would attend, and I decided those passes would not sit as empty placeholders that silently excused them. So I went to the commencement office and asked whether I could reassign my guests to another family on the wait list, and the woman behind the table skimmed a list and said there was a grandmother who had been standing in line every day asking if there was any way to see her grandson walk, and I said, please give my passes to her and her husband, and within minutes I was standing in the hallway with a thin envelope and an older couple holding it like a prize. The man telling me in a voice that shook that their grandson was the first in their family to graduate and that they had been hoping for a miracle, and I felt something settle in me that was not cruelty and not pity either, more like alignment, because my parents had handed me a space and I filled it with people who wanted to be there. There was a part of me that wondered if I was being petty, if I was building a little theater just to make them uncomfortable. And I let myself sit with that question for a few minutes, because I don't want to turn into the kind of person who confuses spectacle with strength. But the truth is I wasn't manufacturing anything, I was simply refusing to keep covering for them. And if sunlight made them itch, that was their skin, not my doing. By late afternoon, the dean's assistant called to confirm that I would deliver the short address after the opening remarks. My professor texted 3 words that said, "Make it count." My inbox pinged with replies to the broadcast link from relatives who signed off with "proud of you," and the family group thread lit up with a thumbs-up reaction from my mother and a short line from my sister saying she hoped I wouldn't make the day about drama, which was funny, given where she was spending it, and I set my phone face down on the desk, looked at my single page of honest sentences, and understood that the idea had become a plan, and the plan had acquired a microphone, while their empty seats had already been claimed by two people who would clap like they meant it. And that was the first cut, clean and quiet, with the deeper blow still ahead. When the day finally came, I woke up with the kind of calm that feels less like peace and more like a deep resignation, the kind where you already know the disappointment has run its course and all that's left is the performance you promised yourself you would deliver. And I went through the motions of getting dressed, fixing my hair and pinning on the cap without waiting for texts or calls that I knew weren't coming, because by then I had stopped expecting even a token check-in from my parents or my sister, who were probably sipping lattes in fluffy robes at the spa, posting stories about family time, while completely ignoring the fact that they had deliberately left me to stand alone on what was supposed to be one of the most important days of my life. As I walked onto campus, surrounded by groups of families holding flowers and balloons, hearing mothers call out their kids' names and fathers fumbling with cameras, I let myself feel the sting for exactly one moment before I straightened my back and reminded myself that every step I had taken to reach this stage had been mine alone, and that maybe standing alone wasn't the curse I had once believed it to be, but rather the perfect preparation for what I was about to do. The ceremony itself unfolded in a haze of clapping, faculty in robes, speeches that blended together, and flashes from cameras that were never pointed in my direction, and yet I wasn't distracted, because all I could focus on was the sheet of paper folded neatly in my pocket and the knowledge that after the dean gave his predictable remarks about perseverance and community, it would be my turn to step up to the podium and face the broadcast camera that was streaming to every person I had invited, from cousins in other states to my parents' colleagues who always asked about me with polite curiosity, the same colleagues who would now see exactly how their friends treated their own daughter. When my name was called, there was a moment where my stomach turned over, not with fear, but with that sharp clarity that comes right before you jump, and I walked toward the stage with a measured pace that kept my hands from shaking. The microphone was already adjusted to my height. The dean smiled in that distant way administrators do when they are simply fulfilling a schedule, and then it was mine, the silence, the attention, and the red light of the camera that I knew was feeding into homes, offices, and yes, that spa lobby if anyone happened to open their phones. I began with the expected words, thanking faculty and mentors, acknowledging classmates and the work we had done, and I could almost feel the room preparing to tune out because graduation speeches often dissolve into cliches. But I wasn't there to soothe or repeat platitudes. I was there to tell the truth in a way no one could pretend not to hear. So when I reached the middle of my page, I lifted my eyes directly to the lens, steady and deliberate, and I delivered the line I had written weeks ago, the one I had rehearsed until I could say it without a single break in my voice. For those who didn't believe I was worth the trip, this one's for you. The words didn't shout, they didn't tremble, they just landed, clean and sharp, slicing through the air in a way that immediately shifted the energy of the room. I could hear an audible reaction, a ripple moving through the audience, some people gasping softly, others murmuring, and a section of classmates clapping harder than before, not because they fully knew my story, but because they understood the sting of being dismissed. And in that moment, I wasn't invisible, I was unforgettable. I finished the rest of the speech without faltering, closing with a note of gratitude to those who had supported me in small ways, the professors who answered late emails, the classmates who shared notes, the employers who gave me shifts when I needed rent money. And as I stepped away from the podium to the sound of applause that felt louder than I had anticipated, I could already feel my phone buzzing inside my gown pocket with the weight of dozens of notifications piling up from the live broadcast link I had circulated. When I finally sat down and allowed myself to glance at the screen, I saw message after message from relatives saying they were proud, from family friends saying they couldn't believe what I had just said on stage, and from numbers I didn't even recognize asking if everything was all right, which told me that the broadcast had done exactly what I intended. It had cut through the carefully constructed image my parents and my sister always put forward and revealed the gap between who they claimed to be and who they were when it came to me. I knew, with the same clarity that had carried me onto that stage, that their phones would be blowing up in real time with the same reactions, that the spa wasn't far enough away to protect them from the sound of truth echoing louder than any excuse they had rehearsed. As I turned the device face down and tried to focus on the rest of the ceremony, hearing names being read and cheers going up for classmates whose families filled entire rows, I thought about how, for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for my parents to clap for me, because I had already claimed something bigger than their approval. I had claimed my own voice, live and unfiltered, in front of an audience they couldn't control. But even as that realization steadied me, I also knew the fallout was only just beginning, because if I could already feel the shift in the air among the people around me, then the storm on their side must have been breaking wide open, and the real confrontation, the one I had been unconsciously chasing all my life, was already on its way. And as I sat there with my cap slightly crooked and my name already behind me, I allowed myself a small, private thought that pulsed like a quiet drumbeat. They had chosen absence, and I had chosen exposure, and while absence fades quickly, exposure leaves marks that never quite wash off. When the applause settled into the background and the names kept rolling in neat alphabetical waves, my phone kept vibrating like a small animal trying to escape, and although I didn't want to become that person who stares at a screen during a ceremony, I also knew that the entire point of sending that broadcast link was that the truth would travel faster than excuses. So I took a breath, opened the messages, and saw relatives I hadn't heard from in years writing that they had watched live and were proud, neighbors from our old street saying they always knew I was steady even when it wasn't fair at home, and then, cutting through the congratulations, a stack of screenshots from a cousin who follows my sister's online life more closely than I ever have, showing me how Madison had posted a short story with a caption about car trouble and illness and family emergencies, which might have worked if the photo attached to it didn't show her glowing in a white robe with a glass of something expensive in a lobby that had the spa's logo shining in the background. And the comments were already turning from praise to suspicion, with people gently asking whether the emergency had resolved and whether the family member in question happened to be getting a diploma without her parents in the audience. I felt the anger slip into a colder, cleaner shape that made me careful rather than loud, because there is a difference between drama and documentation. So I typed one brief message in the family group thread that said I hoped the spa had a strong Wi-Fi connection because the student address had already aired and the replay would be up in a few minutes. And then I copied a link from the university channel and sent a second message to my mother's book club and my father's colleagues that thanked them for watching and included one extra line saying that my guest passes had gone to a grandmother and grandfather who had been waiting for a miracle, which was the truth and nothing but the truth, and truth, when it is that clean, doesn't even need adjectives to burn. Within an hour, the university communications account clipped my speech and posted the short video using a caption about resilience that was more flattering than I deserved, and I did something my sister would have considered small and petty, but that felt, to me, like the most adult version of a counterpunch I could throw, because I reposted the clip with a note that read like a thank you and not like a drag, saying I was grateful to everyone who tuned in and that I dedicated my words to anyone who has ever felt like distance was all they were given, and underneath it I wrote that the replay was available for those who were too tired to make the trip, because I wanted the line to stand exactly as it had been delivered. Clean and public and impossible to misinterpret. I did not tag my sister, and I did not type my parents' names, yet the algorithm and old-fashioned human forwarding did the rest, because friends of friends started leaving comments on Madison's posts with gentle but pointed questions. And a woman from the church group wrote that she had cried watching the speech and wondered whether Madison might consider calling me today rather than posting stories about self-care. And while I do not celebrate dog piles and I hate the way the internet can twist a person overnight, I also refuse to pretend that a little accountability dropped from the sky without cause, because nothing about that day was accidental, and the chain reaction had been set in motion by choices that weren't mine. At some point, a message from my father came in asking me to please take the video down because it made the family look bad, and I stared at the sentence for a long time, thinking about the way that phrase had never been used to protect me when I sat at piano recitals alone or when I paid for my own books by shelving them in the library at midnight, and then I answered with something so plain it could not be argued with, writing that I hadn't posted anything private, that the university had shared a public event, and that I was simply thanking the people who showed up, which included a couple I had never met until that morning, and for the first time I could remember there was no reply from him. Just an absence that felt like a door closing softly on a room I no longer needed to enter. I did one more thing that afternoon, and it was the smallest gesture if you measure it in time, but it turned out to be the one that cut cleanly through the last veil of their self-image, because I called the spa's front desk, gave the reservation's name, spoke to a manager in a voice that was calm and courteous, and asked whether they might deliver a printed card to the suite with a short note that said the graduation replay was ready and that the daughter they were resting from had just spoken. And the manager, who had likely delivered hundreds of indulgent messages to guests without blinking, went quiet for a beat and then said she would make sure it reached them along with a link on their in-room tablet, which meant there was no longer any version of the day where my parents could pretend they did not know. By the time I left campus and walked the long path back to my apartment, my phone had turned into a hive of responses and missed calls, and those long paragraph texts that people only send when the narrative they have rehearsed for years has been yanked out of their hands. And at the top of the stack was a video message from a friend who works near the resort, showing Madison outside on the curb with her mascara smudged, arguing into her phone with someone I couldn't see, and as cruel as it might sound, I didn't feel triumph or vindictive joy as much as I felt an even, measured relief that the imbalance was no longer invisible, that the cost of choosing me last had finally posted to their account in broad daylight. And while the final reckoning hadn't happened yet, I knew I had moved the board into a position where checkmate was no longer a fantasy, but a matter of playing the last few moves without flinching. By the time I got home and set the program on the kitchen counter like a receipt from a purchase that had finally cleared, the messages had shifted from congratulations to demands, with my sister sending a string of paragraphs about how I had embarrassed the family and damaged her reputation, and how I clearly did not understand what stress she was under, followed by my mother asking me to please be reasonable and consider how this would look to neighbors and church friends, and then my father, who never uses extra words, writing that the video needed to come down because the situation had gotten out of hand, which made me laugh once and then go very quiet. Because for years the situation had been out of hand in a way that harmed me privately while keeping their public faces clean, and now the harm had finally stepped into the same light as the faces. I called Madison back, not because I expected grace, but because I wanted the terms to be spoken out loud in a voice that could not be screenshot out of context, and when she answered with my name like it was an accusation, I let her run through the familiar script about family unity and how I could have come to her privately, and how she had a migraine, and how people were messaging her brand partners, and when she finally stopped to breathe I told her, in a tone that even surprised me with its steadiness, that nothing of mine was coming down, that I had posted nothing private or cruel, that the university had shared a public moment and I had shared it too, and that if she wanted the noise to stop she had exactly two options. Either she could write a plain apology on her own accounts acknowledging that she and our parents chose a luxury weekend over my graduation and that they regretted it, or she could continue posting stories while I posted the screenshots I had been saving for years, showing the pattern that led to this day, including the spa check-in that had been timestamped less than an hour after they told me they were too tired to come, and I said this without heat, the way you read terms and conditions, because at a certain point the emotion has to give way to the contract. She tried to pivot to love and forgiveness and the idea that families make mistakes, and I said I was not attacking her character or her future, that I was asking for a specific action that would repair a specific harm, that I would not use ugly words or dig for old dirt if she chose the first option, and that if she chose the second, then I would not argue online with anyone. I would simply post a short thread with dates and messages and let people draw their own conclusions, which felt less like vengeance and more like turning on a light in a room where someone keeps tripping and calling the furniture evil. And when she shifted to tears and said I was ruining everything, I told her the only thing I was refusing to ruin was myself. After we hung up, I set a timer in my head, not a dramatic countdown, but a private limit that would keep me from being dragged into more circular calls, and I opened my laptop and drafted the thread in one sitting, without adjectives and without commentary. Just the campus email about the live stream, the group message where I sent the link, the text where my mother said they were too tired, the spa story with the smiling check-in, and a photo of the older couple in my guest seats with their permission and a caption that said the passes had gone to people who wanted to be there. And as I looked at those pieces lined up in order, I felt something inside me click into place that had nothing to do with rage and everything to do with finally trusting that my memory had not invented this imbalance. While I waited, relatives called to say they had reached out to my parents and gotten either silence or defensiveness. A former teacher texted to say she had shown my speech to her class and that they were talking about what it means to show up for people. And the spa manager sent a brief note saying the card had been delivered and that she hoped my day had gone well, which felt like a small confirmation that the message had reached the room where they were hiding from it. And when the private limit I had set for Madison's decision ran out, I pressed post on the thread and put my phone face down and made dinner in the quiet, because for once I wanted an action to stand without my heart racing toward it. The first fallout came faster than I expected, with an aunt calling to say she had spoken to my mother, who was angry that I had dragged strangers into a family matter. And I said the strangers had been invited the moment my parents chose a public vacation over a public ceremony, and my aunt went quiet and then whispered that she was proud of me, which made me sit down at the table and breathe in a way I have not breathed since I was a teenager. And then a friend sent me the clip that would become the unofficial end of the story, because it showed Madison outside the spa, not staged and not filtered, being comforted by a staff member while on the phone with my mother, saying through hiccups that this had gotten out of control and that the comments were asking for an apology she did not know how to write, and I felt only a measured kind of mercy mixed with a boundary that would not budge, because the apology she did not know how to write was the one I had asked for in clear words. Earlier that day, I answered one more call, this time from my father, who spoke softly and asked what it would take for me to stop, and I said I was not doing anything anymore, that the thread would remain and the clip would remain and the speech would remain, that I would not post another thing if they each wrote a single sentence to the same people they had proudly invited to watch their vacations for years, a sentence that said they chose wrong and that they were sorry and that they would be at the next thing, without excuses. And he was silent long enough that I thought the line had dropped, and then he said he would think about it, which in our family is the slowest form of yes. I ended the night by sending a quiet thank you to the grandparents who had filled my seats and by writing a small donation to a campus fund in their grandson's name with a note that said this is for the people who show up. And I put my phone away without checking the numbers or the comments or the shares, because the point was never to win a scoreboard, but to make the imbalance visible enough that I could stop explaining it to myself in the dark. And when I finally lay down, I did not feel triumphant or vindictive. I felt resolved, the way you feel when a door that has stuck for years finally opens and you do not have to shove your shoulder against it anymore. And, while I do not know what will happen to my family in the long run, I know what happened that day, which is that I chose not to be small, I chose not to cover for them, I chose the light, and 2 hours later my sister was sobbing outside, and for once I did not rush to fix it, because the lesson could not be learned any other way.